Yes.
So my name is Kurt. I'm a physical therapist and runner here in Boulder, Colorado. And yeah, I've been working as a PT for almost 10 years now, which is kind of crazy. Time goes by quick. Yeah, so mostly outpatient orthopedics and get to work with a lot of runners, which is what I'm really passionate about. And it's been, really fun to work with, some of the, runners, all levels in Boulder, from weekend warriors to like professionals and everything in between.
So this is super exciting for me, known you for close to 16 years, and it's been awesome to see you, what you've done in the PT world, but then also personally, like training-wise, you've gone from, at least what I can remember, maybe like 112 and a half, now all the way down to 104 and a half, and Olympic trials qualifier in the marathon. So
Yeah.
Congratulations on all that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, when I first moved to Boulder, I did a couple half marathons out of the res, and I remember I ran like 118 or something like that. And just like, and it was like a shock to the system, like, oh yeah, like altitude is hard, but yeah.
14 minutes faster. Well done.
Yeah.
So to cut to the chase, super excited to have you here today and kind of talk about like healthy running. So what I wanted to kick it off with was maybe some injury reduction strategies that you might have with some of your patients that are new to running, or maybe it's people that have been running for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some like simple ways for runners that are just getting into the sport, or maybe have been consistent and have had issues? What's a better way they can kind of approach their training to stay healthy?
Yeah, totally. So that's one of the hardest things about running, and one of the things that I think actually makes running kind of special is that you have a very high chance of getting injured, which on one hand, sucks, like getting injured sucks, but on the other hand, it kind of makes running a task that only people that are willing to do all the little things and kind of like make it through those injuries are going to excel at. So I kind of try to like flip it around and think that it's one of the things that makes our sport special is, that high risk of injury, but there's definitely things that we can do to mitigate that risk. Unfortunately, you can never completely eliminate risk of an injury. Yeah, so it's hard to, there's so much information out there, it's really hard to decide like what is good information. So it's helpful to like have a coach or clinician in your area that you can use to kind of, for them to sift through what's going to be good for you and what's not good for you. But
on that note, is there any good follows?
Oh man, there's a few people that I really like. Rich Willie is one person that's great for runners, or Chris Johnson, and Nathan Carlson are like three big runners that I would recommend like any runner follow. But yeah, the best way to reduce injury risk is by having good, sensible training. So most injuries occur in a period where people are doing something new or building up or increasing some part of their training, either volume or intensity or hills or whatever. So that's when most injuries happen. And the science behind that isn't perfect, but that's one variable that is probably the most important thing. And running is about running. So like, let's try to keep it that way. And you got to check that box of, is your training good? Are you working with a good coach? And are you, are you following a plan that is appropriate and kind of has the long-term progression in mind? So I think that's the most important thing is the running itself and, how that's looking. So then the next important thing is most injuries, the biggest risk factor for that injury is having had that type of injury in the past. So if you've had a bone stress injury, that means you're at a greater risk for having one again. So, or if you've had an Achilles tendon issue or another tendon issue, you're probably a bit more prone to a tendinopathy or that sort of a thing. If you've strained your hamstring, you should probably do some work to address those hamstring strength deficits from that injury. So that's the second important piece, is kind of identifying your individual risk factors and addressing those things, and your prior injury risk, and then things traditional PT things that I think everybody like kind of knows about and hones in about. So your biomechanics, maybe your strength in certain areas, your stability in certain areas, your ability to move in certain skills or have certain coordination of movement, and then mobility. Runners, we need mobility in our ankles and our hips, and those are the main areas that people kind of run into a lot of trouble with. So kind of identifying any personal risk factors that you have. And then kind of the next tier would be just some basic fundamental strength and conditioning. And I think in the past 5 years, a lot more runners have kind of woken up and realized that if we do 2 days a week of some sort of strength and conditioning, we're going to be much better off. And there's some really good systematic reviews and meta-analysis that are out now that this is like the scientific fact. If you do some sort of strengthening, you're going to be less injury prone, and also probably improve your running economy and therefore maybe performance. So I think there's some really good rationale for just pretty much every runner doing a little bit of strength and conditioning each week. And that can look different for different people depending on your time and your access to equipment and stuff. It's been hard with COVID this year, but yeah, the strength and conditioning should really be transitioning more and more towards like true strengthening, which runners tend to be pretty shitty at. And PTs tend to be pretty shitty at prescribing real strengthening things. So true strengthening is not 2 sets of 30 repetitions with easy TheraBand. It's barbell lifting and doing some actual real load to improve the tissue capacity of your muscles and tendons and bones. So kind of actually getting into some real lifting over time.
So this is kind of a broad question, but working with a wide range of athletes like you have, are there any specific exercises you think are kind of universal that runners should be doing?
Yeah. So again, start with the basics, and the good thing about not having a background in formal strength and conditioning, which a lot of us don't, is if you just start doing anything, you're going to get a training benefit from it. So if you haven't done any lifting, then just start doing something and adapt to that for 6 to 12 weeks, and then you can get more focused as you go. But yeah, we should be transitioning towards an ideal schedule. I think for a runner would be maybe 2 days a week in the gym, and maybe you're there for 30 to 60 minutes total, and maybe you're going to do 2 kind of bilateral heavier lifts. So maybe you do back squats with the barbell, and then maybe you do some sort of deadlift or the trap bar hex deadlift. So you do those 2. And then maybe you do 2 single leg kind of focused things like a split squat or a single leg RDL. And then maybe at the end of that, you do some sort of targeted capacity training. So if you have a history of Achilles or calf issues, maybe you do some heavy loaded calf raises after that. Or if you have a history of hamstring injury, maybe you do some hamstring specific work to target that. So so I think that would be the ideal thing, is just some general total body multi-joint lifts, the generic stuff, squats, lunges, that sort of thing. And then layer in on top of that something a little bit more specific for you. And don't get bogged down in the details. That's really hard these days. There's so many things to work on, and people say this all the time, runners and non-runners, where do I start? I got to work on my foot and my hip and my knee. And time is an issue. And then also, even if people are motivated, you can only adapt to so much in the same day. So I always just tell people, if you got 15 minutes, just pick 3 exercises and do those things, and then a few weeks down the road, switch it up and do a few different things. So keeping focus on form is really important, and being intentional in the way that you move, just like you would be intentional in the way that you do a speed workout. It's not necessarily harder is better. It's, you're trying to get a desired outcome, and that's going to be difficult, but the purpose isn't to just go until you lose your form. So, but at the same time of that, there's kind of been a reversal in the PT world where, your form doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, and your biomechanics don't have to be absolutely perfect, because we all move in different ways. So, again, don't get frustrated and bogged down in the details of that, but just be mindful in the way that you're moving, and use somebody to help you figure out how to move better, or how to use muscles better if you aren't getting there on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you have needles?
I had like
I thought it was your
adductor.
I wish it was a
GFL.
faster.
So I do end up doing a lot of manual therapy, especially with runners. So an acute injury, like, we want to kind of hone in on first, what's caused that injury. And then we want to use whatever tools we can to kind of get it to calm down. So in the clinic, after we, diagnose something, we get a game plan, then I'll usually start out with, some sort of manual therapy, whether that's soft tissue mobilization, or instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization, or dry needling. And those things we're finding out, even though the original theories were very mechanical based, meaning you're breaking up scar tissue, or you're mobilizing a joint and putting it back into alignment or something like that. That stuff hasn't really held up. Those theories haven't held up to research, and it turns out that they were theories, and they're probably not true in a physical sense. But manual therapy still makes people feel better. So we're tapping into some sort of neurologic pain-mediating benefit where, someone comes in and their knee hurts, we do some work on their quad and their hip, and anything else kind of remotely related that might be important, just to kind of get that irritability to calm down, and get that person moving better and back to running quicker. So definitely, using manual therapy in a short-term benefit is something that people respond really well to. But it shouldn't be the only thing that people are doing. And in some cases, it's not even something that we focus on at all, because somebody just needs, maybe they just need a little bit of relative rest to offload the injured tissue, or they need to, modify something else. So starting on manual therapy, and then usually some sort of loading on the injured tissue. So if you've hurt your Achilles tendon, we want to do some loading to the Achilles tendon to get that tendon to adapt and handle the high loads that it's going to experience with running. And then kind of looking at other related factors, either proximally or distally. So, for the Achilles as an example, maybe there's something going on with that person's forefoot or big toe, or they're not quite using their big toe, or they're not getting their big toe down to the ground. Or maybe their hips are really weak and they're getting a lot of rotation through their trunk and pelvis. Just kind of addressing all of those factors that might be influential, kind of for that whole person's kinetic chain is also where we start to go from there. But I kind of forgot to mention too, a big part of running injuries, like we talked about a second ago, is like, mainly we're having overuse injuries, so we need to take away some of that load. So that usually means running a little bit less, or maybe modifying some other factors in your training, maybe your gait, or maybe you can run easy but you can't do speed, or you can't do hills. So somehow offloading that tissue to let that heal while still doing the amount of running that you can tolerate. Unless, of course, if it's a bone stress injury, then that's, complete rest is absolutely warranted in the case of a bone stress injury. But even there, we're finding out, you have a stress fracture, like you want to rest for the appropriate amount of weeks. But as soon as we can, we want to start doing some strengthening to load that bone, and then eventually we want to do some things fairly frequently throughout that person's day, because we know that bone responds well to smaller doses, but frequent doses of loading by either lifting or hopping or running or walking. So it depends.
I think this is kind of a beginner's question, but I guess, you have someone that's just starting out running. What's like the most common running injuries, would you say, and what do new runners have to worry most about?
Yeah, and there's a lot of data on kind of beginner runner injuries, and a lot of it's from the military, because if you think about it, the military gets people in there and they have them start running a lot in basic training, so people get injured a lot. So so anterior knee pain, which kind of used to be called patellofemoral pain syndrome, but basically, pain around the patellofemoral joint, I believe, is the most common running-related injury. And then other things, like plantar fasciitis is super common, a variety of tendon injuries, Achilles, patellar tendon or quad tendon, hamstring strains or proximal hamstring tendon injuries. So, so tendon injuries, and then like a more true like joint injury, like if someone has a hip impingement or a labral tear in their hip joint. Those are pretty common as well. And then shin splints, which is a term that I don't think any clinician really likes because it's just really vague. But so shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome, and then that kind of bridges us into the continuum of a bone stress injury or a stress fracture, as they used to call it. But so bone injuries are super common and can be tricky to treat, and everybody's a bit different with all those things. But I guess my philosophy, and any good PT's philosophy, is like, let's figure out what's going on, and then let's do what the research tells us to do for this particular injury, and then adapt that to the needs of that individual that you have sitting there in front of you, based on their biomechanics and their training history and kind of all these individual factors, and kind of see what else we can layer in on top of kind of the basics of that rehab process.
So to summarize, and when it comes to staying healthy as a runner, what like major takeaway would you say runners should have? Yeah,
so I've kind of had a big shift in my thinking in the last couple years, because as a PT and as a runner, you come out of school and you want to learn all these all these like very intricate manual therapy techniques and very specific things about anatomy and how to treat very specific injuries, and kind of what I've realized, and what a lot of kind of research around bone injuries and in tendon injuries, and I think training and coaching in general, is we're finding out that no individual factor is as important as we think it is. So I think as runners, we tend to be people that go all into one particular thing and put all of our effort into that thing, and that can be a really good thing, but it can also sometimes lead you astray. So no one factor is as important as we think it is, and for me that was kind of a hard pill to swallow, because it means that someone comes in with a tendon injury, let's say, and we can't just blame their running biomechanics or their calf strength or their biomechanics or the way that they move. There's no one little thing that we can isolate from a physical therapy perspective that caused that injury, or that they could have done to prevent that injury. And same thing from a coaching or training standpoint. There's no perfect program that you could ever eliminate the risk of having an injury. So it's just like having conversations with people and getting them to remember the big picture. And a lot of those things are things that we don't historically think about with running, but it's stress levels and sleep and just overall lifestyle factors. Does that person need to talk with a registered dietitian? What else is going on in their life that they could maybe put more energy in or de-stress from more, instead of doing some hip band exercises or whatever, which would be adding more stress to the system. And sometimes people come in and they're busy at work and they're a parent, and then they're running, and then they're like, oh yeah, well I need to do this or else I'm going to get injured. Well, maybe that's not the right answer for you. Maybe it's just like kind of just find some sort of personal time to relax or whatever. So yeah, it depends, and just do what you can and chip away at things that you could improve on kind of incrementally. And just the other thing I think we all get focused on, like wanting to get to some endpoint, but at the end of the day, like we need to enjoy the journey and just enjoy the process. So
Hear that? Enjoy the journey. Killed it, dude.